Good evening. Welcome to ND Admissions Live, where tonight we're going to be focused on financial aid planning. I think the title of the session is appropriate tonight because it's Financial Aid 101. So any questions that you have about financial aid, scholarship, the process here at the University of Notre Dame, we welcome those questions. We have two panelists here from our Office of Financial Aid, and I'll have them introduce themselves, and then we'll open up this session to your questions. So as you're looking at your screens and questions come to mind, type them in, and we'll do our best to answer your questions here. So Mary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Joyce. Good evening. My name is Mary Nutroni, and I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Notre Dame, and I am glad to have the chance tonight to be able to be with you and answer any questions that you have about the financial aid program or the process here at Notre Dame. And hopefully you've been receiving some emails from us. You should also, if you haven't gotten it yet, I don't know that you can see this really well, but you should be watching for this brochure in the mail. It should be coming to you shortly. And it'll give you a little bit more information in writing about our process. So I'd like to also turn to my colleague here and have her introduce herself.
Thanks, Mary. Good evening. My name is Christine Butts, and I'm Associate Director here at Notre Dame in the Office of Financial Aid. And I, too, am happy to be able to help you through the college financing process. So I guess we can go ahead and get started.
Sure, and Mary just reminded me that I failed to introduce myself, and so I'll take a moment to do that. I'm Joyce Lance, and I'm the Director of Recruitment and Communications with the Office of Undergraduate Enrollment at Notre Dame. So we're glad you're here, and we'll just jump right into your questions. I see a question that probably isn't that unusual about filling out the FAFSA. And could you talk a little bit about the deadline related to the FAFSA as well as any other forms that we require?
Sure. That's a great question, and one that's really important. Regardless of whether you as the student are applying for early action admission or regular action admission, the process remains the same. And so at Notre Dame, we use both the free application for federal student aid as well as the CSS financial aid profile. And you can find more information about those applications on our website at financialaid.nd.edu. And again, in that brochure I showed, we'll also give you the direct links to those forms. The application materials for the 14-15 academic year are going to be available after January 1, 2014 is when the FAFSA becomes live on the federal website. The CSS profile can actually be completed now, but there's really no reason to do that at this point in time. Our actual priority application deadline for financial aid is February 15th. And I specify the word priority. It's not a cutoff date, but what we do suggest is the earlier that the students complete the financial aid application process, the earlier in our process they'll hear. That is to say, though, we start sending financial aid decisions in late March. And so what we hope when the family completes the applications, you don't have to use completed income tax information. We would encourage you to do that if you can through the data retrieval tool if your tax returns are completed, because it'll make the process much better for you, more accurate data. And actually many of the colleges and universities throughout the country are going to ask for that same thing. I don't know, Chris, if you have any other tips about that topic as well.
Yeah, I think that we would encourage everyone to complete both of our applications and apply for financial assistance. But I think it's also important that you use the most accurate information that you possibly can in order to meet our priority date. So if that means you have to estimate your information, go ahead and do that, and then we'll work with you to get the verified information, the actual information later.
That's a great point.
And can you talk a little bit about what if a family is a divorced family, there's a divorce in the family, how do they fill out the forms? Can you just talk briefly about that?
Sure.
The free application for federal student aid asks that the student complete it based on the household that they live in. So they're going to be basing it on the parents. It could include a step-parent or a domestic partner. The CSS profile, we actually ask for families, if they are divorced, that if there's a non-custodial parent, that they complete the CSS non-custodial profile for us. So we actually will look at information about both of the biological parents or the adoptive parents.
And when the family completes both the FAFSA, the student will actually get an acknowledgement from the federal government via electronic means, so through an email, telling them that they've completed the FAFSA process. In terms of the CSS financial aid profile, they also, that custodial household or the married household, will receive also an acknowledgement that indicates the application was submitted. In the case that Chris described of the non-custodial parent, what will come in that acknowledgement process from the College Board will be a link to the non-custodial profile with directions on how to change the password once the non-custodial parent has received that information. So it's a very secure process for both, for all parties. The information is protected through personal identification numbers in both the FAFSA and the profile.
Okay, good. What about work study at Notre Dame? Do students have the opportunity for work study?
Student employment is always encouraged. We think that as the studies show, that it is good for students to work while they're here on campus. Not only are they having an opportunity to earn some money for their pocket money, spending money, but also I think it helps with time management, and I think grades are better as well. So anywhere that you see students working on campus, that's a great place to start. And we have a job board available on our website as well. So we would encourage students to not limit themselves to what's posted there, but also pursue what is of interest to them as well.
And I think one of the interesting things at Notre Dame is that our undergraduate students are afforded many of the same kinds of opportunities that graduate students are. So we do have students who are working with faculty. Maybe they're doing research, and research expand what you think of as research. So it might be doing library research for a history professor. It might be that typical scientific research. So we have students paid in those research kinds of positions. I know one of the popular jobs is an admissions tour guide. I think they can't start that until sophomore year. But that's another very popular job on campus. But again, maybe the student has artistic talents, so some of the students, particularly artistic, or if they're coming with graphics design. So really, I think it's the imagination of the student of where they really want. They can make that student employment opportunity be reflective of where they want to go with their academic major. So, or maybe they really want to just study. And so maybe they will get a job in the library checking out books. So again, I think the opportunities for employment on campus are really, there's wonderful opportunities for the students who want to work. Average number of hours I think a student will work would be anywhere from 5 to 7. We'll allow a student to work up to 15 hours per week, but really they're full-time students. First-year students, sometimes they'll decide they don't want to work in that first semester. And again, that's really up to the family on what they want to do. But Chris's point is really well taken. The research does show that students who work at least 5 hours a week tend to be better time managers, and they also engage more in community life, and they make connections with people on campus, which helps also with that transition to college.
Sure, absolutely. There's a few questions that are coming in regards to student loans and some concern about leaving college with a significant number of loans. So could you talk a little bit about our philosophy when it comes to student loans and how that's managed at Notre Dame?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is certainly being cautious about borrowing is an important consideration. With that said, one of the other things that I would say both to students and parents is I think the word loan has become, or a student loan has become almost a 4-letter bad word in our country. And what we're seeing in the popular press is some real exaggerations, and you're seeing outlier cases in terms of student graduates with $100,000 debt. Yes, there are some students. Are there students here at Notre Dame undergraduates? Not that I am aware of. More of those cases that you're hearing in popular press are going to be related more to graduate students who've pursued a professional degree. The other thing I would say to a family is this is an investment. And so as we think about paying for any large investment, we would never think about going to buy a house and saying, I have no down payment and I have, I don't really want to take a loan. That's not how we buy a house or how we buy a car. So as we think about the investment in education, that's what I would encourage you to think about. Again, with that said, I would say then there's an appropriateness to how much a student should borrow. The average freshman package has about $4,000 in the financial aid package. That's a need-based loan that has interest deferred on it, and the student and their family has definitely demonstrated that they needed that money. And so completing the financial aid application process, again, Chris mentioned it when she was speaking earlier, that we'd really encourage all families to complete the process. Don't just choose not to complete it because your neighbor completed it and they didn't get something. So again, I would start in terms of student borrowing. Yes, be cautious, but don't be fearful. The student loan, the average debt here, need-based debt upon graduation is about $23,000 for the last class that graduated. What we're seeing, however, on our campus is a downward trend in terms of borrowing because the university has really made a strong commitment to try and limit borrowing to a reasonable amount. So we definitely want to keep that debt under a $20,000 limit. But again, when we look at $20,000 on roughly $225,000 in education, that isn't a bad thing. When we look at repayment of that, I'm only going to guess off the top of my head, which was probably a bad thing to do, but we're probably looking at the most $150 a month loan payment. Again, if you were going to take a standard loan repayment. So again, if we would borrow to buy a car and we would be willing to pay a monthly car payment, education is the only non-depreciable asset that I can think of other than Gold Bar, and I don't know anybody who's buying that or brokering it right now. So again, I think you need to put borrowing into context, and but not be afraid of that, and really think about this as a return on investment of where the future is going to bring, and that comes to a whole different conversation of where our graduates go and whatnot.
And I think with the families that I've talked with, borrowing has afforded them opportunities.
That's a great way to look at it.
Not limiting themselves to certain types of financial aid, but being open to the different types, including loans. And that has afforded an opportunity, especially if a student is admitted to the school of their dreams, and it may be a little bit out of what they would consider their comfort zone, but it is a reasonable way to afford that chance to attend that school.
Can you talk a little bit about what are you looking at? So somebody who's never gone through this process before, there are a lot of families out there that this is maybe their first child to go through this process. What are you looking at? How do you determine, who gets a loan, who gets a grant? How does it all come together? What do you look at?
We look at a lot of different factors. When we're asking families to complete these two applications, and we're looking at the student and the parent. We're not just looking at the student's information. This is a partnership with the school, the parents, the student, or the family unit. So we're not just looking at income and assets, but we're also looking at household size, a number in college. We also look at
where people live in the country.
Exactly.
We look at one of the reasons we use the CSS financial aid profile is because it gives us much, I call it robust information, but really it helps draw a picture for us. The FAFSA, the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, it doesn't really tell a story. It gives us a family size, number in college, but I don't know who those people are. And then it looks at the adjusted gross income and the wages of the family. And really with that, I don't really have a picture. The picture comes from, as I said, the CSS profile, because we will look at 2012 actual income. We'll look at 2013 actual or estimated income, and do you have, what do you expect to earn in 2014? So again, what we can see is shifts in family income. We also can see asset information. There's much more information on the CSS profile. So what the financial aid process is trying to do is to evaluate a family in their present situation. And we're looking at income is really the primary driver for most families of how the family's share is going to be determined. And again, these are based on methodologies so that we can try and be as equitable and consistent with all families who share similar circumstances. So we know that that families cannot take all of their income or all of their assets to pay for higher education.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're really doing is trying to evaluate how much money is disposable and how much could be derived from current income. But again, it's also what I call a three-legged stool. So if you think about the three-legged stool, the premise of financial aid, as I mentioned earlier, is that families will save something. And again, we can get into savings or not savings, but even if it's $500, that's $500 less in loan that a family might need to borrow or finance. And then paying out of current income and or financial aid, and then out of future income, which would be the long-term financing. So that's really the premise of how families should approach paying for college, and that's the philosophical approach that's behind the need-based financial aid, which is Notre Dame. 97% of the aid here at the university is based on demonstrated need. 3% of the assistance that we give is strictly based on merit and no financial need demonstrated.
Which leads me to the next question. There's a few questions about what kind of merit scholarship programs does Notre Dame offer?
Sure.
So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Notre Dame has a number of merit aid programs. Probably the longest standing one is the Hesburgh-Usco Scholars Program. That program is, and Joyce, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about the actual application process and how students get into it. But one of the things I'll say is students who are admitted to the university are considered for all of our merit aid. If the student is very competitive for that merit aid, we're also going to reach out to them and invite them into some specific processes. So some are automatic, some of our programs are an invitation. The Hesburgh-Usco is kind of a combination, as I understand, the application process. And that program is looking for transformational leaders. And it's not just about money to the student, although there's a nice benefit. It's $25,000 a year for 4 years. That is a program with also faculty support and enrichment opportunities each summer prior to freshman year, sophomore, and junior year. And I would invite you to go out, hesburgh-usco.org, I believe it is, or come to the admissions site and you can connect from there and read the profiles of the Hesburgh-Usco scholars. They're really amazing young people. So again, it's a combination of academic strength as well as demonstrated leadership already as they complete their high school career. The second largest program would be the Notre Dame Scholar program, and again, very, very competitive. Students who are typically in the top 1 to 2% of our admitted students are invited to apply for that program and compete for that scholarship. So there's anywhere from 20 to 25, both Hesburgh scholars and Notre Dame scholars, both have a $25,000 a year for a maximum of 4 years or $100,000. There is a Stamps Scholars Program. Again, that's going to be by invitation. Again, it is a very, very competitive program. There are 5 to 7, if I remember correctly, Stamps Scholars. There is a Scott Family Scholarship Program. Again, very competitive. Students are going to be invited to apply from the admitted pool. And again, there's about 5 of those students. And all of these, the Stamps Scholarship has some variable amounts, but basically it covers tuition fees at the university.
And what not to interrupt you, but what I would encourage you to do in regards to our merit-based scholarships, if you go to our admissions website, which is admissions.indy.edu, there's a specific area within our website environment that outlines each one of our merit-based scholarships. And my advice would be to check those out, read them carefully, and you'll probably gather more information there in a place where it's all together, where you can compare and contrast better than we could explain.
Exactly.
Here.
That's a great point, Joyce.
Yeah, I think, and the other thing that you may have already picked up on is that we are very focused on need-based aid at the University of Notre Dame. So when Mary says that the merit-based aids are limited and somewhat competitive, they are, and I think it needs to be explained that most of our resources are going toward need-based aid, and that's a real commitment that the university has made, and that really goes back to the idea of what Chris said. Make sure you're filling out that FAFSA, and make sure you're taking the time to fill out that CSS profile as well.
I don't think it ever hurts to complete those applications, even if you think you're not going to qualify. How do you know? And how do you know at Notre Dame? And if we don't have you in our system, if we can't evaluate, we can't really offer the full amount of assistance that you may be eligible for.
Absolutely.
Or even give you good recommendations on financing.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so it really helps us to have a picture. And keep in mind, the university is need blind in admissions. So the admissions office doesn't know at all if you apply for financial aid. That is completely separate from the admitting process. And so, again, some schools use financial need in their admissions process. We do not. So I wouldn't be concerned about what anyone thinks about you applying for financial aid. Very honestly, we have families in, I think the average income last year of families receiving need-based aid was in the $145,000 to $150,000 range. And families who make more than that with multiple students in college are also receiving need-based scholarships. So again, Chris's point about you're never going to know if you don't apply. And again, the other thing we know is family circumstances change. And so if you've completed the process and maybe someone loses a job, or more frequent, unfortunately, right now is natural disasters. So we've had a lot of families affected by hurricanes, by fires, by flooding. And again, we have the information on hand. We can start working immediately when a family experiences a change versus trying to get them started in the process, and it could be a month or more, particularly if there's a family crisis that we're trying to work through. So that would be one of the reasons that I would say you need to complete the application.
Sure. And I picked up that somebody had a question about, there's a particular question on the Common App about, did you apply or do you intend to apply for financial aid via the FAFSA? And they're concerned that they marked no, but may now be using the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Please understand that the admissions committee probably won't even look at that question. It's not part of our process in reviewing applications, so it's not going to hurt you in any way.
And nor will
the
it affect
admissions process.
from our end as well. So.
Yeah, so don't worry about it. The FAFSA and CSS profile, can you review again when they're due?
We ask that the new students complete this by February 15th.
Okay.
And that is a priority date.
So if you complete that after, we still will accept it. We still will fund the student their demonstrated need. So again, if we want good information on that application. So if you can complete your taxes, that's great. If you can't, we'd rather have you in the system and ready to work on your application. So that's why we use the word priority, because it's not a cutoff date. We'll continue to roll financial aid decisions out to our admitted students.
And do students, regardless if they've been admitted or not, or are still waiting on their admissions decision, should they fill out the forms?
Absolutely. I think they should make sure that they're meeting the priority date with the best information possible, even if they haven't been admitted yet. If that admission comes through, then that triggers our application, our review process, and then we can get on it, I guess, if
Mhm.
you will,
Mhm.
in making sure that we get that offer out to the students in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm. So for the incoming class for 2014, are you looking at the 2013 tax year, or are you looking for families to submit information about the 2012 year? Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. The free application for federal student aid will always ask for the most recent verifiable year. And for 2014-15, still hard to say,
Mhm.
we'll be using the 2013 tax information. The CSS financial aid profile will actually look at a number of years. We will be looking at 2012 as the past, 2013 as the current, and then the anticipated 2014. So we actually look at 3 years of information. What we're looking for is consistency. We're trying to make sure that when we are evaluating that family's ability to pay for education, that we are looking at the whole picture, that we're not just focusing on 1 year as a snapshot. Unfortunately, that's what the FAFSA does, but we're trying to look at the whole picture.
Sure, that makes sense. Can you give us a sense of when students might receive their financial aid notifications for both early action as well as regular applicants?
So students who have everything complete, so that's going to be the CSS profile, the FAFSA, and then any other documents that we request. Typically from first-year students, we're going to ask for the completed federal tax return or the IRS data retrieval tool or transcript for 2013. We may ask for what's called a verification worksheet, which basically just confirms who you reported in the household and the number in college. So those documents, and again, you're going to find when you complete the CSS profile through collegeboard.com, you're going to get information from there when you complete the application about what we need to complete your file. So if you have everything in, and your file is complete once you are admitted, we typically will start sending early action students. Letters will go first because they already know of their admissions decision, and those will start mid to late March. And then our regular action students, those will be sent about 3 days after the admissions decisions are sent, and we continue to roll out both early action and regular action financial aid notifications after those dates and times. And then the merit aid, that's the only piece that then might hold up a financial aid notification because there are interviews and different things like that. So we may hold back some of those financial aid notifications even if a file was complete.
Sure.
And we know families are anxious, especially students are anxious to make a decision, and May 1 kind of looms over a lot of heads. So we want to make sure that for those admitted students that we're getting it out in a timely manner,
Sure.
so that they can make that decision. So we do make it a priority to put those offers in the mail.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and we may have gone over this quickly. So let's just take a minute to talk about where they can find both of those forms.
Sure. The FAFSA is on fafsa.gov, or you can also put in fafsa.ed.gov. Buyer beware, don't put in fafsa.com.
Right.
You will get a FAFSA, and then you'll find out that you're going to pay to complete that FAFSA. And the first word in FAFSA is free. So if you get asked for payment, you're on the wrong place. But it's fafsa.gov. The CSS profile can be found on collegeboard.com. And you can go to the financial aid or the admissions website, and we have direct links for those forms right on our website, so you can go through that way as well. And again, for those of you who might have joined us later, you can't see this very well, but hopefully you can see it's blue and gold. And I would say, I know we mailed these starting last week, so the students should have received something in the mail or will be receiving this. And inside, there's actually a little chart with all these deadlines. One side is blocks, and if you flip open the brochure, you'll see that the actual application deadlines, the documents we need. We did this so you could hang it on your refrigerator. literally. So it would be kind of forefront for you to help you remember what the dates are that we're looking for and where to find these forms.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about special circumstances or a situation where a family's income fluctuates, maybe somebody that's self-employed, and how that's handled year by year?
Sure.
I think, well, with the FAFSA itself, we're looking at a snapshot in time, which will be the 2013, and that's kind of the expected what the next year is going to look at. So with the CSS financial aid profile, there's an opportunity for families to explain those expectations or those changes that they see, that they're foreseeing. At any time that there are changes in the information that's provided, or as they're going through that application and completing it, and they realize that, you know, it's not really asking me about this situation that affects my ability to contribute towards educational expenses, we would want them to let us know about that. Because as we're looking at and reviewing those applications, we want to make sure that we're looking at everything that affects a family's ability to contribute towards educational expenses. So whether it's providing it to us up front on the CSS financial aid profile, or sending us a separate email or a letter. If they want to include documentation, that's great, but most likely we're going to look at it, and if we need additional information, we're going to ask for it. We do have we have to be consistent in some of the decisions that we make. So we try to be thoughtful about how far we'll go in making those decisions. Mary could probably add a little bit more too.
Sure. And some of the reasons, again, that we use that CSS financial aid profile is that it asks for things that we know families report frequently. So it will look at private grade school or high school tuition. We'll know that information right from the CSS profile. So we're going to take that into account right up front. It's going to look at extenuating medical circumstances. So maybe your family experienced a family health crisis in the past year. We can see that right up front. So again, it's a circumstance we're going to be able to see. So again, we don't have to ask you. So many of the schools that might just use the FAFSA, they won't have that information up front, but we will. We're also going to adjust for things like cost of living. So again, we recognize that living in Manhattan, New York is different than living in Manhattan, Kansas. So again, we'll adjust for some of those circumstances. And as I think Chris said, there's a free form section on the CSS profile where you can even tell us about it. So maybe it's you were in the areas affected by the hurricane or in the flooding or in fire or whatever. You can share some of that information in free form. So then we'll have an alert and know that we want to talk with you a little bit more. The other thing I would say is, again, at Notre Dame, we're trying to be very transparent with families about what we're going to consider and what we won't consider. So in terms of special circumstances that may come up after the financial aid applications were completed, again, on the financial aid website, we have a section on our website called Special Circumstances. And we'll tell you right there what we're not going to consider. So we're not going to match another school's award. We're not going to help pay for a wedding. We're not going to do some of these things. But then we also go into, these are things that we're willing to consider with additional documentation, and this is the process. So we have a very specific process. It's a very similar process to many of the schools where we tend to find our families who cross, where they're applying to the same schools. We have very similar processes for submitting additional information, and many of us are using the CSS profile. And again, part of it is so we have consistent information, and we're really trying to prepare decisions for financial fit. And Chris has mentioned we're trying to we want students to enroll and graduate from the university. So we're trying to be consistent in our decisions and give a financial aid offer that is sustainable over the 4 years for a family so that they know that the student can enroll and graduate.
Sure.
And unfortunately, there are times when we just have to wait for the cycle to take place. We may just have to wait until we actually have 2014 tax returns in order to really take a look at those fluctuations in income from year to year.
Sure. There's been a few questions that have come in about siblings. So can you talk a little bit about what if somebody already has a sister or brother that's in college, or even a sister or a sibling that is at a private school where they're paying tuition at the secondary level?
We actually do take into consideration those educational expenses for private school that families are paying for elementary, junior high, and high school. The CSS financial aid profile specifically asks for that information on our family grid. The student will complete information about each of their siblings, and then it'll ask where do they attend school and also how much are they paying in tuition. So we do take that into consideration up front. For siblings that are in college, that's also part of the consideration on both applications. The free application for federal student aid and the CSS financial aid profile factor in that that the family has more than one in college.
So what I would say too is that number in college is a major factor. And so as a student graduates from college, so maybe this is the second student in college, when that older sibling graduates, we would anticipate that the family contribution, there would be more resources available for the student left in college. So that family share would increase, and it is possible. And this is not just at Notre Dame, this is just how the methodologies work, that need-based aid would go down. Similarly, though, is we see many times that this is the first child in college, and what the family is thinking about is, how am I going to sustain this contribution when I have a second in college? Well, the information there is that at Notre Dame, the financial aid would increase when that second entered college. The one piece to know is that parents don't count in the number in college. And at Notre Dame, we don't allow for graduate school students in college. So while we might consider them as part of the using some of the family resources, that same advantage of having two in college, while we certainly want to see students go on for medical or professional schools or graduate school, that isn't something that the university can support with our need-based aid. And so those students would not be considered.
And so what I hear you saying is that if students here for 4 years, they have to apply for financial aid each year that they're here?
Every year.
That's a great point, Joyce. Is while we hope admissions is a one-time process and you select Notre Dame, the financial aid process is an annual application process because family circumstances change, like number in the family, number in college, what the income is. And so we want to make sure that we are assessing the family and their current status and their family share based on that information.
So is that deadline of February 15th the same each year?
For continuing students, we actually use an April 25th deadline. And we do that because our first-year students are our priority, because we know they have the May 1 date, and we would rather have the continuing students use actual income information. We don't want them to complete it in February and then have to wait for 4 months and wonder why we're not communicating. So we use an April 25th date for our continuing students. Transfer students would be different, and I won't go into that. It's on our website, but if there's anyone who's thinking of transfer, that would be out on our website.
Do you take into consideration the age or the health of parents or guardians?
So the federal formula definitely does when it looks at the assets a family might have. And again, on the FAFSA, really all that is considered in assets on the FAFSA would be cash in my checking account, my savings account, if I have any non-retirement assets. But my home isn't considered in the FAFSA. But those assets that are reported on there are then protected, so reduced by the age of the older parent, and it's tied to retirement. Our approach on the CSS profile is a little bit different in terms of assets, so it collects more information on assets, and families will see that we ask a question about retirement. We're not assessing retirement. We're not looking to say you should cash in your retirement. honestly, what it does is helps inform us. So when we have a family, we do look at the age. We see the age of the parent, and we can see how much, if any, resources has a family been able to save for retirement. And very honestly, especially with the economic changes in the past few years, we've seen a lot of underpreparedness. And again, that helps us to know, particularly if that parent is nearing retirement and they're underfunded, that there's very much competing priorities for their disposable income. And so again, we try to take that into consideration. What that means in a financial aid package, that's hard for me to say on a webinar. It's probably going to be a individual case, and it might be a committee decision actually. So again, we're looking at consistency, and what we do for one family who has a similar would be treated very similarly, in a very similar way.
I think the information that is provided on these applications really tells a story. I think Mary mentioned that earlier. She used that term, story, about that family. And as we are reviewing each of these financial aid files or applications, we have staff that's doing that. The computer is not making that decision for us. So we're seeing a lot of information and pieces that you wouldn't necessarily think would speak to us. They actually do. They help us understand what that family is able, or may not be able to do, or be able to do. And so that kind of helps us formulate our decisions as we go through. Doesn't mean that we are as arbitrary across the board. I mean, we follow a very set formula, but it kind of helps us when we have to make those hard decisions.
I think the other piece to the question that I didn't answer was, do we take into the health as well? Yes, we do. So if there is a parent or a sibling in the household who has a medical condition or some type of disability that is needing resources from the family, again, those are non-discretionary expenses, and we would prefer that a family tell us that. So again, we said we're need blind, and that goes for even financial. So maybe in the admissions application, the students shared about caretaking for a younger sibling or an older sibling who's in the house who has special needs. We wouldn't know that in financial aid because we don't go out and read the admissions application. And so the more you tell us about your story, the more we can take into consideration. Now, we do read everything that you send, so please don't send me 100 pages. I will read it, but I will remember you, and it might not be the most favorable memory. No, I'm just kidding. But
It'll just take longer
seriously,
to process your application.
It will take longer to process your application. But we do want to know your story, and I think to know here too, every financial aid application is read by 2 financial aid professionals, not just one. And as Chris said, it's not a button that we're pushing and just spitting out a financial aid award. We're really trying to do a holistic review of that family's circumstances and give the family the best financial aid notification that we can when we first mail.
Sure.
Joyce, can I just tell you, I started in January, and I've been extremely impressed with the amount. I've been in financial aid a long time, but I've been extremely impressed with the amount of review that goes into each of those financial aid files. It makes it much easier when we're talking to families that we're confident that we looked at all of the information that we had. And I don't know that a lot of schools can actually say that. So that was one thing that really hit me. It made an impression on me when I first started. So
yeah, it's good to hear.
I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. I've seen a couple of admissions related questions come in, and I just want to take a moment, as some of you are feeling anxious about when you might receive your admissions decision. And our early action decisions, we are working very hard to review those applications so we can get decisions out to students before the Christmas holiday. So that's the best I can do at this point in time. I don't have a very specific date that I can tell you, except that you will get your decision if you applied early action before the Christmas holiday. And then for those of you that applied regular action, we really aim to get those decisions out to you toward the middle end of March, and that's our goal as we move forward and read and review those applications. So I realize that many of you are feeling anxious about when you might hear, and we certainly understand that, but we are reading and reviewing, and we'll get those decisions to you as soon as we can. Now back to financial aid.
Okay.
What about 529 plans? So some families have invested in 529, and can you talk a little bit about how Notre Dame manages that?
I'll let you, Mary, talk about that. It's something I'm still learning about.
Sure,
so.
sure. So 529 plans is a great savings tool. And, the ownership of that, I'm going to actually direct you to look at because it all comes back to who owns that 529 plan. One of the things that, and I'm going to move it away from a 529 specifically and talk just about savings. And so at Notre Dame, one of the things we really value if a family has saved. And we don't really care if they saved in a student's name or a parent name. The FAFSA application does care. So the assessment of a student asset is more than how a parent asset would be treated. We take that out of the equation and we just say a family saved. And we actually move it over as a parent asset and make many more protections and many more allowances against those assets. Because, again, the piece is we want a family to save because that's the premise. Saving before, paying as you go, financing future. So 529, great vehicle. Part of how you report is going to depend on who owns that 529 plan. So again, there's very specific instructions both in the CSS profile and on the FAFSA. If you have more questions about that, what I do suggest is that you contact our office and we can talk more through, because again, there's 529 savings plans, there's 529 prepaid tuition plans. So we could do a whole webinar probably on 529 plans, but good savings vehicle.
Okay.
For a family to use.
Okay, and many of our students come to Notre Dame with outside scholarships, so scholarships they've earned and received from outside sources. How does that factor into our financial aid packaging?
Sure. Outside scholarships are treated as a resource in meeting a student's financial aid eligibility or financial need. The university meets financial need of all of our, demonstrated financial need of our students who apply for financial assistance. And so we have to factor in, or we have to incorporate that outside scholarship into the existing, if we know about it after the fact. Students have to notify us. We'll incorporate that into the existing financial aid offer. At any point that a student knows they are receiving an outside scholarship, we would encourage them to notify us so that we can just make sure that it is included in that offer that we make initially. It is, like I said, considered a resource. In some cases, it could replace some loan funds, but it also could replace some gift assistance because it's a matter of meeting need, our financial aid policy, and how that outside scholarship has to be treated.
Okay.
So, and just to add a little bit to that, there's a lot, there's this very specific example out on our website that if you have more questions about that, this can be a really confusing topic for families because the meeting financial need makes us different. There's only about 70 schools in the country who, there's a little over 70 schools in the country who actually meet full demonstrated need. So those schools' policies are going to be very similar on this topic. And as Chris said, our policy is to reduce any self-help. Mm-hmm. And so we would replace work, we would replace loan in the financial aid package. And once a student exceeds the amount of self-help in their financial aid package, only then would we reduce any university gift. So when, and this isn't a Notre Dame policy, the treatment of an outside scholarship as a resource, that's a federal aid policy. So any kind of financial aid office is going to have some kind of treatment of outside scholarship. So that's a great consumer question to ask any institution. So again, if a school does not meet financial need, your family's share was bigger to begin with. And so it's going to look like they are just letting you have more assistance. They didn't meet your family share to begin with. They didn't meet your demonstrated need. They just increased your family share on the front end. Mm-hmm. So now they're reducing it in the back. Again, it can be a very confusing part, So I'm probably not even explaining it very well at 8, whatever it is, tonight, and that's why I say you might want to look at our financial aid website, and again, call our office, because this is a very common question. Our policy is really quite generous, because we've met your need to begin with, and then we reduce self-help.
Mm-hmm.
And we treat each one of them as an individual. We treat each financial aid package as an individual. So I think that lends to how difficult the difficulty level of trying to explain that to a family without looking at specifics. The hypotheticals are a little difficult because we don't know what an individual student's going to have and what they're going to receive. We would encourage all students to pursue those outside scholarship opportunities because you just never really know what that final offer is going to be, and this is a great time to start applying for those, and to not discount them because it might affect your financial aid offer from the university. It's still a great opportunity because if it is reducing that self-help portion, that's just less that the student either has to borrow or work in order to meet the costs.
Sure. What about alumni scholarships? I know we have a pretty significant alumni network.
We do.
What about scholarship opportunities through alumni?
We're very, very blessed by our alumni, and they play a significant part in financing. So there are over 145 alumni clubs, actually throughout the world, who offer scholarships to our students. And I think last year there were about $4 million that came in through alumni support specifically for our admitted students and our continuing students. With that said, 2 things. So your next question is probably, how do I apply for those? That's where, again, you need to complete the financial aid application process because no one will be considered for an alumni club scholarship without completing the full financial aid process. And so both the FAFSA, the profile, and the other documents we've talked about need to be completed. Most of the clubs choose to offer their club scholarships on a need basis. And so that's why that must be completed. The club scholarships are treated like an outside scholarship. So what we just talked about in reducing work and loan, that is how they're treated in the package. And that's really what our alumni want to happen with those funds, is to add on to what the financial aid package already included for a student. The other thing I would say is what's the dollar value is going to depend on the particular club. Some might be $250 and some might be $5,000. It's really going to depend on where the student is located, how many students are competing for that scholarship. Typically, there is not a separate application process. Again, the students who are admitted and have gone through the financial aid process are automatically considered through a private site that we have that allow our alumni to choose from a list of eligible students. If the club area the student lives in does require a separate application process, we will notify that student through a special mailing that's coordinated with the club. An example would be the Chicago area does interviews and they require an application. So again, we would notify students of that process when the club is ready to do that.
Okay. I know we covered this briefly earlier, but just to touch on it again, if a family is a business owner, how does the business that they own play a part in the financial aid process?
The business is part of the application. The free application for federal student aid has a pretty specific definition of what type of a business is included. Typically, if it's a small business, if they are more than 50% ownership, family ownership, if there is 100 full-time equivalent or fewer employees, then it's not factored in. It's not included on the free application for federal student aid. So small businesses typically get a break when it comes to the federal application. The CSS profile, it is still part of the overall evaluation for university assistance. So we do ask for that information on the CSS financial aid profile, and it will be used in evaluating a family's financial strength and their capacity to pay for education.
And the business formula is treated very, very differently than something like a house. I'm not going to go into it. It's clearly generating the income for the family. So the assets held in a business are treated, they're protected first. It's only an equity evaluation, and those are treated very specifically, reduced before they're even put in with other forms of assets. We haven't talked about it, but for families who aren't aware, there is a net price calculator, which they can find on the admissions website. And under the financial aid tab, if you scroll down a little bit on a typical screen, you'll find a link to the net price calculator. And I think some of the general questions families have could be answered if they're really wanting to find out. The net price calculators by law have to be on every school's website. So you could go on every school that the student is thinking of, go through the net price calculator, and it does two things. It takes a family through whatever methodology the school is using, and then creates a hypothetical financial aid, a notification or award for a family. It's a tool. So again, this question of business is a very good one. You could get probably a pretty good sense of how a business or a home could be considered. But what I'll say is that it's a tool, it's not a final answer. So what I mean by that is there are certain things programmed specifically on Notre Dame's net price calculator that we're going to look at much more carefully than what a calculator out on a web. So like I just mentioned, a home. It's going to ask you for value, and it's going to ask you for debt. It's very straightforward on the calculator. It's not that straightforward when we actually do our evaluation. And the other thing about our tool is we offer a lot of academic scholarships within financial need. And as a student would go through that, you would notice that there's no academic questions on our net price calculator, because it's not just about test scores for Notre Dame. And again, in admissions, we're a holistic admissions. We also offer our academic scholarships within need based on a very holistic review of the student's academic profile and whatnot. So again, the tool is out there. It should be on every college or university the student is considering on that school's website. It will give you an idea. If you have results and you have questions about that, you are welcome to contact our office directly and ask about them. We're probably going to ask you to see the calculation, and we're not going to all of a sudden then create an actual financial aid package. So please don't hear me saying that. My staff will kill me. But again, if you do have some specific questions, we'll try and field those for you in terms of that. But again, it's a good tool and might help with some of these very specific questions about siblings in college, how's a 529 plan completed, and again, some of the really good questions families have asked tonight.
And I think it does bear repeating what Mary said about the assets, going back to the asset question. We are looking at the value and the debt against that asset as well. So we're looking at the net worth of it. So it's not just one-sided.
Good. So we have about 3 minutes left of our webinar this evening, and maybe as we wrap up, you could talk a little bit about making an investment in higher education. And while there's a lot of choices that students have after they graduate from high school, why is higher education a good investment? Why is the University of Notre Dame considered such a great value for students? And I think that might be a nice way for us to wrap up our webinar.
Sure. Thank you, Joyce. That is a great question, and I think families have to look at things like graduation rates. What's the freshman to sophomore retention rate? What's the satisfaction of alumni? What percentage of students go on to get a job immediately or go into service? So it's that employability, that network. Those would be some of the major factors that stand out to me about the university that make it a great investment for students. Is it the place for everyone? No, it's not. And actually part of the challenge, I think, for families is you're looking for a college fit that's right for the student to grow body, mind, and spirit. And I think there's also a financial fit. And we will do our very best to provide options for financing and affordability. But again, just as a family chooses fit for the student for that education